Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be doing a history of possession, both divine and demonic, mostly demonic, but we'll talk a little bit about divine possession as well. This could be an entire semester's long class, right, in reality. But we're going to focus very specifically on Western Europe to keep this around the 30-minute mark and regale you with some tales and some information it's unlikely that you've heard, even if you have researched this topic before. In 1969, a study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, spirit possession belief were found to exist in a 74% of a sample of 488 societies in all parts of the world. Right, so there is to this day even a heavy belief in spirit possession. Now, over the course of this video, if you see me sweating, it is not due to possession of a demonic or divine kind. We've put up 2 new lights, and they're really bringing the heat as well as the lights. So I might have to hire a secretary at some point to fan me, or an assistant to fan me while we do these in the future. The Greeks in the Western world, in Europe, provide a pretty good examples of possession. Hippocrates wrote, the founder of what we consider modern medicine, wrote, "If he foam at the mouth and kick, Ares is to blame." The god Ares is to blame. "When at night occurs fears and terrors, delirium, jumping from the bed and rushing out of doors, they say Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, is attacking." One of the best examples I can think of demonic possession in the Greek world is actually Helen of Troy herself. Right, now, most scholars don't think of it like this, but it is an interesting take on it. It is possible that Helen of Troy was literally possessed by Aphrodite to go on this journey with Paris, to abscond with Paris and leave her husband. In the Iliad, Helen confronts Aphrodite when the goddess appears to her. "Maddening one, my goddess, oh what now? Lusting to lure me to my ruin yet again. Where will you drive me next? Off and away to other grand, luxurious cities? Out of Phrygia? Out of Manoa's tempting country? Have you a favorite mortal man there too?" Helen is stating that Aphrodite is literally controlling her. Now, whether this is Aphrodite within her body taking possession of her and playing along in order to sleep with Paris, right? Because Aphrodite wants Paris, so she's taking over the body of Helen to engage in this romance with Paris. That is a serious possibility. The other possibility, of course, is that the goddess is literally controlling her like a puppet in order to make Paris happy. Either way, Helen retains no agency, right? So that is an interesting example. Philostratus and the Life of Apollonius, written around the 1st century AD, does have a description of someone possessed by a demon. "And he brought forward a poor woman who interceded in behalf of her child, who was, she said, a boy of 16 years of age, but had been for 2 years possessed by a phantom. Now the character of the demon was that of a mocker and a liar." Here, one of the sages asked why she said this, and she replied, "This child of mine is extremely good looking, and therefore the demon is amorous of him, and will not allow him to retain his reason, nor will he permit him to go to school or learn archery, nor even remain at home, but drives him out into the desert places." Right, now that's key, being driven out into the desert, into the remote areas, because we see that as a repeating theme in perpetuity, right? "And the boy does not retain his own voice." Another key, we see this with possessions later on, the changing of the voice. "But speaks in a deep, hollow tone. And he looks at you with other eyes rather than with his own," right? The changing of the eye color is another trope. As for myself, I weep over all of this, and I tear at my cheeks, and I rebuke my son so far as I well may. But he does not know me. He does not recognize me. And I made my mind to repair hither. Only the demon discovered himself using my child as a mask. And what he told me was this, that he was the ghost of a man who fell in battle long ago. Also, from Philostratus, another example of a possessed person, this one being in Athens, Greece. Now, while Apollonius was discussing the question of libations in Athens, there chanced to be present in his audience a young dandy who bore so evil a reputation that his conduct had once been the subject of coarse street corner songs. Apollonius was then talking about libations when the youth burst out into loud laughter and quite drowned his voice. Then Apollonius looked at him and said, "It is not yourself that perpetrates this insult, but the demon who drives you on without your knowing it." And in fact, the youth was, without knowing it, possessed by a demon, for he would laugh at all the things that no one else laughed at, and then he would fall to weeping for no reason at all, and he would talk and sing to himself. Now, most people thought that it was the boisterous humor of the youth which led him to such excesses. But he was really the mouthpiece of a demon, though it only seemed a drunken frolic in which on that occasion he was indulging. Now, when Apollonius gazed upon him, the ghost in him began to utter cries of fear and rage, such as one hears from people who are being branded or racked. And the ghost swore that he would leave the young man alone and never take possession of any man again. So we see from these Greek tales of demonic possession, and possession in general, that it is not an Abrahamic invention. This is not an invention of the Jewish people or the Christian people, right? This is something that is widespread, and even in Greece, the Greek religion. The so-called Dark Ages, or and Middle Ages, was probably the golden age of the demoniac, right? It's a term which was used to describe someone who was believed to be possessed. Essentially an insane person, right? A benedictional from 1420 specifies the goal of exorcisms as protecting fields and animals from disease. Another contains exorcisms for purifying bells, wax, and palm leaves, right? There was extensive employments of exorcisms against vermin, against insects, parasites. These exorcisms of people were typically done in public so as to create a spectacle and draw a crowd. They were often performed in front of a saint's tomb or in front of a church or on the town square. Their belief was that demons entered the body through the mouth, through open cavities. So the mouth, the ears, the eyes, the nose, less appropriate places, but even through the fingernails, a spirit could enter into you. Exorcisms during the period employed all sorts of things: holy water, holy salt, inducing vomiting, right, in order to throw up the demon. People being forced to take baths in holy water. Fasting was prescribed. There were dietary restrictions put on them, such as only eating holy salt or blessed bread. Reading verses from the Bible, right, or from saints, written by saints, or even showing the possessed the cross or pictures of saints. We'll now describe some of the more interesting cases of demonic possession from the Middle Ages. This is from the canonization process of Dorothy of Montagu. As the victim himself testified, it happened one time that during Lent he disguised himself with a mask. which he testifies that he made, and that thus disguised he went out of his house, saying, I'm going to commit some sin. As he was leaving his house, he met someone else disguised with a mask. He didn't know who it was, and he didn't care. So he left and went to a certain brotherhood or party. When he got there, he joined the dance, whereupon all the dancing girls and women rushed away from him, terrified on account of the witness being masked or enchanted. When the witness took off his mask, his face was turned around backward, and taking his head in his hands, he began to twist his face around to its accustomed place, like forward. But as he was unable to do so, he fell down on the ground like a dead man, destitute of reason or understanding. His friends and everyone else standing around while he was on the ground told him that his face was amazingly similar to that of the mask he had been wearing. The witness adds that he firmly believes that the masked man who associated himself with him when he left his house was an evil spirit who left him while he was at the party. Another description from the De Christina Mirabilis, right? The Christian miracles. She fled from the presence of men with incredible horror, going to deserted places, up trees, to the tops of towers or churches or any high place. She was used to going in furnaces, right, and vomiting fire. She would often enter the graves of the dead. On another occasion, she got up in the middle of the night and, provoking all the dogs to bark, ran before them like a fleeing beast, right? And like a sparrow, she would often hang from the smallest branches of a tree. In the La Leggenda Divana de Orvieto, we have another description of someone who's possessed. I approached her bed. This is from The Exorcist. I approached her bed and placed my hand before her mouth, and absolutely no or very faint breath or respiration was coming from her breath and nostrils. A certain monk was with me, said she was in a trance, and that her spirit was inside her vitals. With her eyes closed, lying supine on the bed, she gave no evidence of life, no breath or respiration of the living, yet she gave no sound of noise while sleeping, so that she looked nothing so much as a dead woman except for the flush on her face. During such trances on her, you might see flies gather on her eyes, which were always partly open at such times. Her eyelids would not move up or flutter down, and so they seemed to be the eyes of not someone who was living, but of someone who was dead. A tale in the dialogue of Caesarius of Heisterbach, in which the crossing of a river causes a demon to flee its host. She was made so demented and was so out of her senses, as much from grief as from diabolical influence, that she used to put little worms into her mouth and eat them. The father was saddened, and he sent her across the Rhine, hoping that the change of air would do her good, and that she might be liberated from the incubus demon that haunted her. After the girl was sent across the river, the demon appeared to the priest and said in shouting words, "Wicked priest, why have you stolen my wife from me?" An extreme case concerns a woman who terrorized the city of Ferrara. So harshly was she tormented by the demon, she filled the whole city with terror. She gave terrible bites with her teeth to the hands and feet of anyone who was able to catch her. She hurled insults and curses at everyone, mixing in terrible slanders. She threw her body about in almost unspeakable and foul contortions. She even tried to burn down her house. Her family became impatient and fed up with this, And since they could find no other solution, they tied her up with a strong chain like a dog and concealed her in a corner of a certain house so that she could do no more harm to anyone. Now, we talked about demonic possession, and almost all of those descriptions were of women. This is not surprising. We're going to get into why. Divine possession also occurred in the Middle Ages. And divine possession, just like demonic possession, seemed to almost exclusively afflict women. From a work of Peter of Dacia, Christ or the Holy Spirit is explicit in the text. Christ is joined to her, and she is made one spirit with him. Who can imagine a sweeter inhabitant than God himself? It is I, the Holy Spirit, who enters you. I, Christ, shall place my words in your mouth. Through your speech, you will penetrate the hearts of your listeners, and they will recognize beyond any doubt that I speak through you. She had the gift of reading minds and of knowing the intent of the heart through the Holy Spirit which lived inside of her. Now, this is a phenomenon that actually is occurring. One woman had a cult that was actually, she was referred to as the Holy Spirit by devotees. There was another cult centered around a woman named Gaglama, right, who was believed to be possessed by the divine God. Joan of Arc, another example of this phenomena, a woman acting as a medium for God, right? Nuns are going to be another example of this, right? Nuns are, something's going on with nuns in the Middle Ages because, and I can't explain it. I guess they would get bored, very bored in these convents, and act out. Either way, we have just so much odd behavior from nuns that we could do a whole video on it. Either way, there were nuns who claimed to literally have Jesus Christ inside of them. Not in spirit, not like, oh, I have Jesus living in my heart or in my soul. But as a physical manifestation in their womb, as in they were pregnant with Jesus, right? And this would apparently cause their bellies to swell, right? Despite not being pregnant, right? So I suppose this was a creative way that nuns came up with to, if they got pregnant, to hide or explain away a pregnancy, or simply that they had been stealing extra rations from the pantry. I don't know. But these two trends of women being the ones being possessed, right, both by demons and by the divine, is paradoxically explained by several beliefs that women were inferior to men. That's why they could be more easily possessed by demons. But when it comes to the divine, a positive stereotype is put onto women, that women were pious and they were innocent, and that's why God chose to inhabit them, or angels chose to inhabit them rather than men. The continued escalation of all the shenanigans in the Middle Ages of exorcisms and of supposed demonic possessions can be seen by the fact that manuals of exorcisms were being published in very large numbers in the 15th century. The Rite of Exorcism was first published in 1614 by Pope Paul V to actually quell the trend of lay people and priests hastily performing exorcisms on people they presumed were possessed, such as victims of the bubonic plague or people who obviously suffered from mental problems. They didn't want these priests or laymen going around harassing people with nonsense. They didn't want a priest to play doctor when a doctor was what was needed. The Catholic Church, in order to curb this phenomena, set about criteria for determining demonic possession in these rites of exorcism. The Catholic Church identified 4 signs of demonic possession. 1, manifestation of human strength. 2, speaking in tongues or languages that the victim cannot know. 3, revelation of knowledge, distant or hidden, that the victim cannot know. 4, blasphemous rage, obscene hand gestures, using profanity, and an aversion to holy symbols, names, relics, or places. That describes so many people on Comedy Central, so I don't know. They also decreed 6 different types of possession. One, which is actual possession, in which Satan or demons take full possession of a person's body without their consent. Obsession is the second one, which includes sudden attacks of irrationally obsessive thoughts, usually culminating in suicidal ideation, and this typically comes through dreams. 3, oppression, in which there is no loss of consciousness or involuntary action. So the idea, we look at Job, the biblical book of Job, where Satan torments him and he loses his business, all his material possessions, his family, and his health eventually, right? 4, external pain caused by Satan or demons. Oh, I have an ache in my leg. This is a demon. 5, infestation, which affects houses, objects, things, dolls, or animals. And finally, 6, subjugation, in which a person voluntarily submits to Satan or demons, makes a pact with the devil. We have a few examples from the Renaissance, right? Renaissance. Martha Brozier in the 1580s was said to suffer from an extreme shortness of breath, the ability to stick out her tongue unreasonably far, and the gnashing of her teeth. She would writhe and move her mouth as if she had convulsions while contorting her face, rolling her eyes, and appearing to show deep vexation and torment. She would also contort her body parts. A rumbling noise was heard from the area of her spleen under her short ribs on her left side, causing her thigh to spasm. She often spoke in a violent and roaring voice. She was recorded to have laid flat on her back and skipped with her whole body, which to onlookers was described as giving the impression of her being dragged or lifted, presumably by demons. During her demonic fits, she was able to endure pinpricks to her hands and necks with only very limited bleeding. She was able to speak with her mouth completely shut, often speaking English and Greek in fluency. The priest Charles Morone thought the demonic possession, however, claim was fraudulent, and he made her drink holy water under the guise of normal water, which didn't do anything to her. He also had the exorcist present her with a key wrapped up in red silk and recite various verses from Virgil, which Martha Brozier actually mistook for the rite of like an exorcism rite, right? So he read Virgil to her, and she was like, "Oh, this is the rite of exorcism," and this bothered her immensely. She went into a conniption over it because she thought she was being exorcised, even though the priest was just reading her Virgil. Henry de Gondo, Cardinal Bishop of Paris, had her examined by 5 members of his faculty. 3 were of the opinion that she was an impostor with little indication of any malady. The Parliament nominated 11 physicians who all unanimously reported that there was nothing demonic in the matter, suggesting that she used the physical strength of her stomach and breast to speak with her mouth shut. Right? So we get the idea here that once these rites of exorcism had been passed by the Pope in 1614, exorcism and really the idea of demonic possession is being highly scrutinized, right? This has to be somewhat scientific, right? You have to make sure this person is possessed. Now we've reached the point that many of you have been looking forward to since the beginning of the video: Psychiatric Explanations for demonic possession. Schizophrenia is one they've thrown out there, but multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder is believed to be blamed for many supposed demonic possessions. According to the Psychiatric Society at large, dissociative identity disorder can cause an individual to actually believe they're possessed by a demon, their eye color to change, their blood pressure to change when they have adopted the personage of another identity, right? This often is accompanied with fits of self-mutilation, of uncontrolled rage, of unpredictable behavior, of violent mood swings, of attacking other people. But this disorder, or any others that we've come across so far, does not explain being able to speak in foreign languages or knowing, right, the unknowable that many victims of demonic attacks were said to have displayed. So the first thing to understand is that, psychiatry is very young. It's a new field of science, right? This is a new horizon, if you will. And it's something that most psychiatrists will admit we really don't understand. We're only just beginning to understand the human mind at this point. So I'm sure centuries from now, we'll get better explanations and a better understanding of this phenomena. We have testimony from several psychiatrists that did mental health evaluations at exorcisms that are actually, they're convinced that actual demonic possession is real. Due to several events. So this is coming from a CNN interview with these folks. The first is Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, director of the New York State Psychiatric Institute, and who has a specialty in the study of schizophrenia. He states that he and a family therapist were asked to examine a young woman who some thought was possessed. He and his colleague tried to treat the woman for several months, but gave up because they had no success. Something happened during the treatment, though, that he still can't explain. After sessions with the woman, he says, he'd go home in the evenings, and the lights in his house would go off by themselves, photographs and artwork would fall or slide off shelves, and then when this occurred, he'd experience piercing headaches. When he mentioned this to his colleague one day, her response stunned him. She'd been having the exact same experiences. He admits I sort of had to admit that I didn't really know what was going on because of the bizarre things that occurred. I wouldn't say that demonic possession is impossible or categorically rule it out, although I have very limited empirical evidence to verify its existence, right? So he did witness some strange, unexplainable phenomena. The second is Dr. Richard Gallagher, who teaches psychiatry at Columbia University and the New York Medical College. He describes this encounter that changed his mind about these things. She was a middle-aged woman who wore flowing dark clothes and black eyeshadow. She could be charming and engaging, but she was also part of a satanic cult. She called herself the Queen of Satan, the Queen of the Cult. But Gallagher would simply just refer to her as Julia. The woman had approached her local priest, convinced she was being attacked by a demon. The priest referred to her as an exorcist who reached out to Gallagher for mental health evaluation. Now, why would someone who was a devil worshiper want to be free of the devil? Gallagher says she was conflicted. There was a part of her that wanted to be relieved of the possession. He says that objects would fly off shelves around her. She somehow knew personal details about Gallagher's life, such as how his mother had died of ovarian cancer. The fact that two cats in his house went berserk fighting each other the night before one of their sessions. Julia, he says, he found a way to reach him even when she wasn't with him, he says. He was talking on the phone with Julia's priest one night when both men heard one of the demonic voices that came from Julia during her trances, even though she was nowhere near the phone and 1,000 miles away. He says he was never afraid, it's creepy, but I believe I'm on the winning side, is what he said. Now, to put all of this in comparison, I personally witnessed an event when I was 16. There was this poor girl who was also probably about the same age, 16, 17, who I knew suffered from schizophrenia. She, and she had been completely fine up until this point, but she had an episode, and in this conniption she had, she was just in an otherworldly state, right? She was growling and screaming in a nonsensical language, just gibberish, I think. She was foaming at the mouth. She was attacking anyone and everyone that was near her. And this episode went on for hours. And we all just had to get away from her. We didn't try to restrain her. We just backed away. But what was interesting about this is I could kind of see how extreme forms of mental illness can appear to others like demonic possession. The woman I knew, the girl I knew, was gone, right? In this state, she was gone, nowhere to be seen. She was in a state that was alien, that was otherworldly, that was inhuman, right? So she did appear to be possessed, right? The person I knew was gone in this moment. Something else had taken its place. Now, what had taken its place was severe insanity, right? But to a lot of people, certainly to ancient people, this would certainly look like demonic possession, right? And when a person is in such a terrible state like this, they're completely unrecognizable from the person they once were, right? It makes you believe that there's a transformation and something else is now, become this person. But I think we can all agree that when we think on this topic, that whether or not a demon is afflicting someone or it's in fact a debilitating mental illness, whatever is occurring to this victim and all the pain that's being inflicted upon them is indeed very, very evil thing. I think ancient people had that correct, right? That whatever is happening to this person is evil, right? They had that right? And then, of course, their way of explaining evil was demons or the devil. The two were synonymous, right? Evil comes from the devil, therefore, something evil happening to someone is the devil. But we have the temptation to say that when we look back at ancient people, we have the temptation to say that demons was their way of explaining mental illness, and that's probably true. But I think it's also probably true that if an ancient person looked at us today, he would say about us that we have the tendency to explain demons with mental health, right? Problems, illnesses. Either way, whether someone is suffering from demonic attacks or they are suffering from severe insanity, however you interpret it, what is occurring to this person is indeed evil. All right? Folks, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm sorry for the cars driving by. I live on a secluded road, but there are these tourists that are probably all possessed to drive up and down my street nonstop. So perhaps we could look into performing an exorcism on the road I live on to stop them from being on a permanent vacation and go back to Florida. Folks, for future videos, I got to figure out a way to stop all that traffic noise. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. We certainly have many others. Feel free to subscribe or to check out other content on the channel. We certainly have very similar like topics: history of dragons, of vampires, of werewolves, and of evil magic in Rome. Thank you so much for watching, and feel free to comment and let me know what other videos you'd like to see in the future.